So at this point, this is where I'd start adding in the tertiary details. Now, I would usually do this via decal machine, but we're actually going to provide a bonus video for that later on in the course since it's actually a paid add-on. And as stated in the course, we're not going to be using any paid add-ons here. This is all going to be in vanilla. So we're actually going to be making our tertiary details using geometry and just modeling things like we've been doing. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to start by adding in some of the tertiary details back here. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is shift right click to move the 3D cursor there, and we're going to add in a plane. And I'm going to go to face snap and make sure align rotation to target is turned on, so that way I can just scale this guy down, grab it, and then hold control, and now it's going to be aligned to this area quite nicely. So if we press period key on the number pad, we can zoom in, and now all I want to do is just pull this edge out a little bit, maybe go into top view and orthographic with 5 on the number pad, pull it to about here maybe, and then extrude back. And let's pull this face out just a bit. Okay, cool. Now all I want to do is add in a solidify modifier, so we'll add that in. It's going to go in this direction. Yeah, that direction. And then all I want to do is bevel these vertices here, give a nice chamfer. So Control Shift B to bevel those vertices. And maybe a little bit less on the thickness. And we'll turn on even thickness as well. So now we kind of have this piece here. So really what we're doing with this is just adding in very minor details to kind of make this thing pop a bit more. You can imagine this is like some sort of clamp on the weapon. So you can get as creative as you want, design whatever you want really. This is just my own personal idea. So maybe what we could do is first, let's just drop a bevel on here. You know, it's always good to work with a bevel before we do anything else. Go ahead and shade it smooth, turn on auto smooth, and then we'll just harden the normals there. Looks a little bit too boring and generic, so perhaps we could, of course, add in a cutter. I'll just use a cube. You could use a single vert, really whatever you want. Gonna move this about here. Gonna run a chamfer. And then we'll just go ahead and control minus on the number pad. That's gonna go ahead and do a difference boolean for us. Let's just move the boolean above the bevel as always. And maybe we'll just change the bevel to arc for the miter type to make that a little bit of a smoother transition. It's not too bad. We could probably do the same thing in this side, so I'm going to duplicate this. Duplicate, rotate it 90 degrees over the Z, and then just kind of move it back this way. And we'll scale it on the Y. Go ahead and run a difference boolean here. And same idea, boolean above the bevel there, and we are looking good. So we'll just move these to the cutters collection. And I think, you know, you could add in more cutters if you wanted, or if you just want to make life a heck of a lot easier, you could add in some bolts, you know, make your own, reuse the ones we did before, and just save some time that way. There's not really a need to remodel these guys if you already have what you need. So let's pull these back. Okay, we'll do that, and then rotate these 90 degrees. Now I'd really encourage you to use your own, make your own type of bolts. Use the Bolt Factory add-on. Do whatever you want. I'm pretty sure, yeah, I made these on Bolt Factory if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, don't copy it to the T, but definitely make your own. You can see how nice this looks. It looks like it's actually, you know, locked in there. So at this point, we'll go ahead and mirror this to the other side. We'll just add on a mirror modifier and put that, where should we put the mirror? Let's move it all the way up here. Or you know what, to make things easier, I'm just going to go ahead and apply these modifiers here. We'll just apply everything except the bevel. So there's not really a need to have the modifiers there anymore. Might as well just keep them applied, and then we can add the mirror without really any issue. We'll put that to the top. It's going to be over the y-axis, right? Yeah, the y-axis. And we're going to choose this as the mirror object. Now we might have to apply the rotation. Interesting. I chose this, did I not? What's this one called? This one's called Vert 002, and that's what we're mirroring it on. No, it's interesting. Not too sure why it's not mirroring over this piece. Oh, you know what I think it is? I think the origin point's in the wrong spot. Yeah, that's it. The origin point's sitting over here, so make sure you're careful of that. But if we just right click and set the origin to the geometry, we should be good to go. And we'll do the same thing here. We can join all these bolts together with Control J. I'll just shift click this, Control C, copy the mirror there, and let's just apply all those. That's not working as expected. You know what? I'm just going to join these two with Control J. We'll just do a mirror, rotation and scale applied. We'll just do a quick manual mirror to avoid any problems. So that one's in the right spot. It looks like it's in a weird spot, but it's actually where it should be. And these other ones, join those together. Apply the rotation and scale with Control A. And I apologize if screencast keys turn off. This add-on, it's very finicky. It turns off at random times, and it's kind of annoying. Now we'll do y-axis. Choose this as the mirror object, and we are good to go. Okay, we are golden here, so now we have these little clamps, or whatever you want to call them. You know, some people might ask, well, what are these for? Well, I usually just say, well, use your imagination, because, you know, to me, I think of something that you'd see in the real world that kind of holds things together. There's this thing when it comes to 3D, and it's the difference between form and function, and sometimes you're looking for a balance between the two. This is more so for form, being artistic about it, less for function, and you know, some people model more for design and technical pieces. I think this is just a good even bash of both, really. So I'm going to add some finishing details along the back piece right here, but on this one specifically. And you can get as creative as you want, of course. I'm just going to kind of do this on the spot. So it's looking a bit too plain and generic, so what I'm thinking is I can duplicate this with a Shift D. We're just going to go ahead and apply everything except the, well, that's the chamfer, so everything except the final bevel, just to make things easier. And I'm just going to go in here and we'll drop in 2 loop cuts. Now it's intersecting, and that's just because they're on top of each other. Don't worry too much about it. But what I would like to do here is maybe add those in, and since this is a big end-gon, we're going to have to use the knife tool for this part. So press K, click, press C, we're going to press Z to cut through, click and press enter. Same idea over here, K, C, Z, click and press enter. And by the way, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but you can see on the bottom here it tells you all the knife settings, if you forget them, but by now you're probably used to them. So let me think. Let's also cut through here so it's not all the way up. And now all I want to do is steal this set of faces here. Actually, you know what? This entire set except for this one. So now we're just going to Control I, X, and then delete faces. So now it's following the curvature as we wanted here. So we'll just scale this a bit on the Y, and we'll extrude this up, make it a little bit more exciting, I suppose. And what I was thinking is we can make some sort of design, kind of like we have on this piece right here, just to make it a bit more exciting. So let's see, let's run 2 loop cuts through here with Control R, scale this a bit on the Y, and then we'll just add in some loop cuts, try to make this as even as we can. Make some squares there, make some squares there. And this one might be a little bit trickier, but you know what? I want to make this even as possible, so we're probably going to need a lot more loop cuts, maybe around that many. So this is pretty even. Okay, this looks good to me actually, and then I'm just going to go through here, control click through, I to inset individually, and now maybe we can extrude down, and we'll get this type of design. It's not terrible. I'm going to also add a little bit of a bevel here on these edges. So we could do a chamfer, we could make it rounded. I think a chamfer is quite nice though, so we're going to do that. And this looks pretty good. Let's maybe add in some circular cuts, or, you know, instead of having to deal with booleans, we can just steal one of our bolts, and instead of this one, I'm going to steal the one that we made from scratch. So you can just go into any of these, select them in edit mode. I'm just going to select one of these by hovering over it and pressing the L key. Duplicate and move it up, and we can press P to separate by selection. So that looks good to me. And then of course, if we use face snapping with align rotation to target turned on, we need to reset the origin to the geometry, and now we should be good. It's going to be upside down, but that's no biggie. We can just press S, ZZ, -1 to flip that, and then if we want to grab it up, G, Z, and then Z to go along the local axis. Okay, it's also duplicated over the Y. So now we have some screws in there. And you can add some to the front if you really want to. Won't be too difficult, so let's go ahead and do it just because. Okay, so we're going to grab this along the X, scale along the Y a bit. Not too long or it might distort, and then that needs to go along the Z axis, scale it to -1. And I don't want to scale it too wide. So you know what, I'll just move these individually. L, and then grab it over. L, and then grab this one over. So now we have those. So I want to run some details on this piece. Maybe we can use some clamps, kind of like we did on this one. So I'm going to go ahead and add in a plane. Rotate this 90 degrees. We're just going to get this in place like so. Maybe we can scale it on the Z a bit. Period key on the number pad to zoom in, and let's see, extrude this across right to about here. And then what we can do for this one is we can extrude in both directions if we just press E, but if we press Alt E, we can do extrude edges, and no, not that one. E, and then you know what, we'll press E, right click, scale on the Z axis. I'm thinking of the extrude along normals for the faces. We can just do this instead, and doesn't look too terrible. Maybe we could scale these in a bit on the X axis, give it some variation. Same for this part, we could add in maybe a edge there and scale that in, give some cool aesthetic design. And now all we have to do is drop on a solidify modifier here with even thickness, and just let Blender do all the work. Let's go ahead and make sure our scale is uniform, or it's not going to look good. Control A and apply the scale, and just bring this back to where it should be, right to about here. So that looks pretty decent. I'm happy with that. Let's array it across. We could array it, or we could just duplicate it, but if you want to be completely even, you can just use an array. So now you'll know for sure that they're evenly spaced out, and we'll leave it at that. So now we only have to edit 1 rather than 3, so that's also a little bit more convenient. So let's go ahead and shade it smooth and turn on auto smooth, of course. That's not terrible. Now we also need, we could use a subsurf and, you know, get in here and make it more exciting, but I'm just going to use a bevel instead because the bevel will get the job done just fine. So bevel with 3 segments, set to angle, and then just put this wherever you want really. Harden the normals and call it a day. So now we have this little guy here. Looks pretty decent. So most of these other tertiary pieces I'm going to be making are just going to be using these screws that we made or that you made, whatever you did with those, because there's not really a huge need to go in here and cut holes in and then add that detail when we now have these bolts to use. Plus the bolts just look nicer and more realistic. So let me maybe steal this one. We're going to go ahead and just scale this guy down. Let's just place one here, that's all we really need. Place one down here. Then I'm just going to press Ctrl J to join those, and we'll just drop on an array modifier and just roughly put these where they need to go. Put that up to 3. And I'm liking how this looks, doesn't look too bad. So this area over here is looking a little bit too plain for my liking, so we need to get this thing looking more exciting. This is just, it's okay to have areas that are pretty blank, but this one is just kind of overdoing it. So maybe we could add something around this little piece right here, because this one's looking kind of boring. So I'm thinking we could perhaps, let's duplicate this, right click, and then we'll just have this separate object now. So if I tab into edit mode, I'm thinking I could put a loop cut right here, tab into face mode, and then alt click, and I'm just going to press E, right click, and then alt S to scale it that way. So now we have a little bit more of a design, and that's why I duplicated it. I wanted to see how this looked beforehand. Actually looks pretty decent. I might keep that, to be honest with you. I'm not too sure what else we could do design wise for this piece, because we already added most of what we wanted. So you know what, I think this looks pretty good, so I'll just delete the other one, to be honest. So we'll have this piece now. And maybe what we could do is we could array the bolts all the way around this piece, so it's like a circular array going around this extruded area. So I'm thinking the easiest way to do this would be to, instead of using a bolt, I'm just going to use a simple cylindrical cutter, because I actually want this to be an actual cut through the mesh. I think that would look nicer. So we're going to add in a cylinder. 32 verts is fine. Or you know what, 32, or we could probably get away with like 25, because it's a very minor detail. We're not going to see all those edges. Let's rotate it 90 degrees over the X, and then just scale this in place. So right about here should be okay. And then of course we have to shade smooth, turn on auto smooth, and I'm just going to run a difference boolean with Control- on the number pad. Looks awful, and that's obviously because we need to put the boolean above the bevel there. Now there are going to be artifacts that's going to be hard to avoid, so we can either reduce the bevel a little bit or move it. So I'm going to drop the bevel just a bit to help us. But as for fixing the artifacts, we can either move this around, or we're going to have to go destructive. I think for now it's easier to move these around and get into a good location here. So now we're going to run a radial array around this thing. So you can think of an array, as something that goes in a static direction like we did for these bolts. But a radial array will go around a certain point that we define to be the, I guess, the radius per se. Now there are add-ons that make this a lot more quick and efficient, but doing it in vanilla is also an essential skill, and that's what we're going to be doing here. It's actually not too bad. So we're just going to select this piece here, and we want to move the 3D cursor to the selected object. So Shift S and then cursor to selected. Now we want to select the cutter here, and we're going to go ahead, actually no, before we select the cutter, let's press Shift A and add in an empty. Now an empty is just this, it's something that doesn't have any like physical geometry attached to it. It's just something we usually use as a manipulation piece, so this doesn't really affect our scene that much. But what we do want to do here is, first of all, we're going to select the cutter, and then we're going to press we're going to right click rather, set origin to the 3D cursor, and this is obviously going to move it right to where this empty is, because it's also on the 3D cursor. So now we want to go here and we want to add an array modifier. And from the array modifier, it obviously just goes in one static direction, which we don't want. So we're going to turn off the relative offset, just tick that off. This time turn on object offset, and we're going to choose the empty with this picker tool. Now make sure you're selecting the empty, not the cylinder by accident. So select the empty, and it's going to look weird, but before we do anything, Control A, apply rotation and scale, very important in like all situations. Now watch what happens if we take this guy and rotate it. Rotate it around the z-axis, y-axis, y-axis, okay. So if you rotate it around the y-axis, it follows this path completely. So all we really need to do is rotate it however many increments you want this to move, maybe to about here. We'll rotate to about this point, and then all we have to do is select the cutter here and just increase the array count. And check that out. Now we have bulbs going all the way around. So at this point we can just move this to the cutters collection, and the empty, don't delete it, just hide it, press the H key, get it out of the way. And now we have this cool looking design here. And if you wanted, you could of course add in your little screws in these holes if you wanted to, but I honestly think it looks fine how it is. Let's add in some more clamps over here. I'm just a really big fan of adding in clamps. I just think they look, usually if you don't have any specific tertiary design in mind, clamps are like the go-to in my opinion. So usually in just the blank areas where I don't know what specifically to put, I'll just add in clamps and it makes everything look good. So I'm going to add a clamp over here and then one over here as well. So as always, we can just use a simple plane. You could do the trick where you duplicate the base mesh and then kind of steal the geometry, but in this case it's easy enough to just use a plane and put it where it needs to go. So we'll move this plane out a little bit on the Y, scale it on the X, like so. And then we'll pull this edge up to, we can just eyeball this one really. So right to the bottom of this bevel. You know, no one's going to be zooming in here and seeing how microscopic and how close it is. That's just not going to happen. So right about there, and then we'll go ahead and extrude it along the y-axis. Okay, and now all I want to do is take these 4 vertices, Control-Shift-B to bevel them, and it looks like we need to apply the scale, of course. Now we'll go ahead, Control-Shift-B to bevel them. And I'm just going to really crank up the segment count to like 10. Now we need to turn on clamp overlap, so we'll press C and then lock it in. Now as always, we need to make sure we get rid of these duplicate vertices here. So select everything, M key, and then merge by distance, and that will get rid of those vertices there. And maybe we could also bevel this edge, make it nice and rounded, just to kind of follow the curvature there. Now we need to be careful, or else we might hit that too hard. Okay, that looks good. So of course shade it smooth and then turn on auto smooth, and that should be fine. We can just add a solidify modifier at this point. Even thickness, I wish even thickness was turned on by default. Didn't really make a difference here, but I would really like that functionality for vanilla. Cool, so now we have a little clamp right there. Okay, so now I'm going to go in here and add a bevel modifier. You know the drill. Just go in here, you can turn off clamp if you need to, harden those normals, and just a little bit of bevel is all we need to capture the light. And in this one I'm definitely going to be using a screw, because in clamps in the real world they always have screws attached to them. So let's go ahead and just find, I think I only used 2 screws here, so we'll just take one of these. I'll steal that one, Shift D, and then, you know, just move it over. What you might want to do is just have a screw just sitting over here somewhere, just ready to grab and duplicate. I've just, I don't know, I've just been stealing it from elsewhere. Okay, we'll go up here, pull this out a bit, and then Shift D. Same for here, we'll just go ahead and move this down, and we are looking good. Let's take these guys and duplicate them across all the way over here. So now we have a little bit of clamping for detail. Okay, so now I want to add some little dots here to the bottom of this piece just to make it look a little bit more exciting, because if we go into material view, I mean, this place just looks a little bit too plain for my liking. So, and also we'll add materials to these new pieces in a little bit. Let's just get everything done for now. So I'm going to add in a cylinder. 25 verts is fine. Rotate it 90 degrees, and then we're just going to place a single cylinder right here and shade it smooth and turn on auto smooth. And all I want to do at this point is maybe do like a little pattern going on, just something exciting. So maybe just a couple of these. You know what, I'm going to stick with something like this. Now, you know, perhaps place these a little bit more carefully than I am. I'm being a little bit chaotic here, but this should be fine. So let's go ahead and join all these together. Control J. I'm going to run a difference boolean on this piece with Control minus. Now you're going to notice right when we move the boolean above the bevel, watch what happens. The clamp's instantly going to kick in, and that's because these are so tiny that the bevel is going to overlap almost immediately. Now with really small geometrical cuts like this, instead of actually moving the booleans above the bevels and having to deal with the clamp and a really tiny offset, I mean, what you could do in this case, another thing you can do instead is keep the boolean on the bottom of the stack, and then we can add in a second bevel. So add in a second bevel, we're going to change, first of all, for the first bevel, make sure hard and normals is off. We need to remove the weighted normal, or better yet, move it to the bottom. And on this one, we're going to change to angle. We're going to turn off, or actually on this one, we're going to change to 60 degrees, something like that. And let's see. Let's go ahead and do 3 segments. And we'll just turn off the clamps, so now we can kind of adjust this manually. So now we have a little bit more control over this piece, so we're not affecting the bevel of the main one. So this one looks pretty neat. Let's also select the cutter, tab into edit mode, so that way it shares it's all one object rather. And let's move this one over here somewhere. Now let's move it to a spot where it's not artifacting. Just find a good connection point. Right about here should be alright, and then we'll move this to the cutters collection, and there we go. Now we have a little bit of detail on there. I think that looks quite nice, a little bit more visually appealing to the eye. I want to do a similar thing over here on this one, so let's add another cylinder in, rotate it 90 over the X, and then scale this down. And we're going to position this, I don't know, around here somewhere. We're going to shade it smooth and then auto smooth. Let's run a difference boolean here. I'm going to do the same exact trick on this one. We're going to add on another bevel modifier. Make sure the weighted normal is now at the bottom of the stack so it affects everything. We're going to set to angle, do like 3 segments, and we're just going to have to drop the clamp on this one. And if it catches everything, just put the angle to something like 60. Maybe, let's see. It looks like it's catching more areas than I'd like. If that's the case, let's see. Let's see if it's catching it. So, bevel, weighted normal. Yeah, we might not have that luxury here. You know what I'm going to do instead? I'm just going to use this one. It actually might turn out okay if we're careful. So that looks alright. I'm just going to run an array straight across, so we'll add an array and then just increase the count. And this actually turned out quite well, so not a bunch to complain about. Let's go into edit mode and duplicate. And whoa, actually this is pretty interesting. You know, I did not intend for this to happen, and you know, sometimes the most random outcomes actually looks pretty cool. So you know what, I'm going to stick with this. I actually like how this looks. Let me just try moving it into a more practical location. So it looks like we're going to have to move this down. Let's decrease the count a little bit. So maybe we have a little bit more versatility here. Maybe like that. Is that alright? It's not terrible. Now we do have some minor artifacting going on, so I might actually drop the bevel just a tad to kind of pick up on that, and we might have to just move this a little bit around. That should be alright, and then we'll just move this to the cutters collection, and now we have a interesting design right there. Now, if you wanted to do what I was trying to do originally, this wasn't even implied, or this wasn't what I was trying to do, but it looked cool. I was actually trying to keep this one straight, like this, and then add on another set. So, you know what we'll do is go in here and then Control minus to add in another set, and move this above the bevel, so now we have that. That's actually what I was trying to do, but I got a little bit carried away. So move these to the cutters collection, and there we go. Now the one big thing we're missing is a barrel on the front of this weapon here. So we need to actually add that in. So I'm going to add in a cylinder. We're going to do 64 vertices because this is going to be a big focus point, so we're going to make sure it's all smoothed out with 64. That should be enough. Shade it smooth and then auto smooth, of course. Rotate it 90 degrees over the y-axis, and then we're going to just scale this guy down. You can put it really wherever you want up here, just make sure it's a good location. So we can make it actually a little bit bigger. Just depends where you want it really. Now we're going to be adding in a union boolean, so just be careful. So let's select this piece and then shift select the weapon, Control plus on the number pad, and we'll just move the boolean above the bevel. Now this is going to give us a little bit of grief because we have these artifacts popping in. So we just need to find a better location for this. And worst case scenario, we have to go destructive, but I'd rather avoid that if I can, but this might not really be avoidable. So yeah, we might be out of luck here. I don't think any spot's going to work very nicely. So you know what, let's go ahead and just apply the boolean, add a new data user, apply the boolean, and just move this to the cutters collection. So basically we just need to get rid of those near miss vertices, so make sure auto merge is turned on. We could probably merge this together. That fixed that one. Same for this side, we can merge this one, double tap G. That looks alright. Down here is going to be a little bit tricky. Now I'm curious as to why this part got cut off. Let me go back. For some reason this bottom area got cut off, and it was right when I applied the boolean. So you know what, I think it has to do with the order of the modifiers here. So you know what, I'm just going to move this boolean all the way up. This should really avoid any potential grief. So there it is right there. So you're going to see once I move that above there, that's what happens. So I bet if we apply this one, now it should be okay. So this can be really anywhere in the stack. Let's apply it. And there we go, now we're good. Interesting result. But anyways, we'll just get in here, start cleaning up the problem. So let me turn off the bevel. This one's going to be a little bit annoying, so I'm going to run a loop through here. Merge this one at the end. You can press 1 with machine tools, or just press M and then merge it last. So now we have that. That looks nice. Now we have a big shading error here, which we'll fix. Don't worry about that. Slide that one up. Good to go there. We can slide this one up. And then same idea here. We're going to merge these together and we should be good to go. So this shading error is because we now have an n-gon right here. Or I assume, maybe not, maybe it's just stretched. Yeah, that's probably all the problem is. So I think it's because we have a pole right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going into that one, and it's kind of stretching the shading. All we need to do is run a loop cut through here and then pull it in, and now the shading's confined, so we're good to go. Looks fine to me. And if you want to add a little bit more of a design on here, you can of course, extrude in the scope, do really whatever you want. You could inset again and then extrude out if you wanted like a something cool at the front. It's really all up to you. I was actually happy with this, but only thing I'm going to do is pull this out a bit and then just add a chamfer, and I'm happy with that. Thing is though, it might not make much sense because this is technically where it's supposed to be shooting out of, so just to make it a little bit more accurate, we might as well inset this and then extrude it back. You don't have to go super far, just enough to make it look like there's a hole in there. and we can leave it at that. So this video is almost a half an hour long, or maybe a little bit over, I'm not too sure yet. And that's because tertiary details take a lot of time, and that's going to be probably one of the most time-consuming things when you model. But by the end of the process, your model is going to look 10 times better, so don't skimp out on the tertiary details. They're very important.